So this presentation is going to go over three different types of energy sources: non-renewable, renewable, and inexhaustible. So we've talked about energy in a variety of different forms when we talked about simple machines, but now we want to talk about natural energy. And natural energy is energy that is supplied from nature. And we can categorize natural energy into three different categories: non-renewable, renewable, and inexhaustible. So when we compare the three different types of natural energy sources, we can first look at their definitions. Inexhaustible, which is the first one, is an energy source that cannot be used up. So an example of that would be the sun and the wind. So the sun and the wind will always be available to us depending on our geographical location, of course. And then renewable energy, it can be used, but it has to be replaced. And an example of that would be animals and biofuels. So essentially, renewable energy sources are going to be living matter. And then non-renewable energy sources can be used up. An example of that would be fossil fuels. And we've all heard the term fossil fuels, and essentially that means coal, oil, and natural gas. So fossil fuels have formed from the remains of living organisms hundreds of millions of years ago, way before the dinosaurs, and it's taken hundreds of millions of years in order for them to form. So once we use them, they cannot be replaced in our lifetime. So there's two different things that we want to look at when we compare these different types of energy sources. We want to look at storage and we want to look at the environment. And inexhaustible is something that we're drawn to because it does not harm the environment. However, there's still some technological advances that need to take place before we can completely harness inexhaustible energy sources. So there is a need for cost-effective storage solutions. So batteries do exist to capture the energy from wind and the sun, but they're not cost-effective. They have been known to degrade easily, and they cannot capture the amount of energy that is actually available to us. So we still have some work that we need to do in this area before we can completely harness it. And then renewable energy sources can be stored for a short period of time. So this is living matter, so living matter can expire, so it cannot be stored forever. And it may or may not harm the environment, essentially meaning that when you do burn living matter or organic matter, you're going to form something called carbon dioxide. And we know that carbon dioxide is bad for our environment. It's tied to global warming. And the heavier the hydrocarbon, the more carbon dioxide that you can form. So when we talk about biofuels, right? So biofuels, an example would be sugarcane and corn producing ethanol, which is considered a biofuel. But when you burn ethanol, it doesn't produce as much carbon dioxide as, say, something like a fossil fuel would. So it may or may not harm the environment, but it is definitely a better alternative to fossil fuels. So when we look at fossil fuels, we know that it harms the environment, and this is something that we're trying to get away from. Right, so using gasoline in our cars and natural gas and coal, but it can be stored for long periods of time, and it's readily available to us. So there's not a whole lot of issues other than it does harm the environment. So it's definitely something we want to get away from. But these are some examples of the comparison between the three different types. So now we want to look at the energy consumption by source. So when we look at non-renewable, renewable, and inexhaustible, petroleum tops the list. So petroleum would be considered a fossil fuel along with natural gas, coal, and then also uranium, which is used in nuclear plants. So petroleum we use makes up 38% of the natural energy sources that we use. Natural gas is 23, coal is also about 23, and then nuclear plants are about 8%, followed by propane. Now, when we look at the renewable and the inexhaustible, we can see that biomass tops the list, but the total amount of natural energy, we're only using 3% of the total natural energy sources that we use is tied to biomass, followed by hydropower, geothermal, wind, and then solar. So now I want to do just a few exercises to make sure that you understand what type of energy sources are being presented. So the first one is a biofuel plant. So remember, biofuels are derived from living matter. So what type of energy source do you think this is? An inexhaustible, renewable, or a non-renewable? So biofuel is considered a renewable energy source. It can be used, but it can also be replaced within our lifetime. Now, what about a hydroelectric dam? This would be considered an inexhaustible source, right? So water, again, depending on our geographical location, is always going to be available to us. And then, what type of energy source is this? This is a geothermal power plant. So the way a geothermal power plant works is it takes the heat from within the earth and it actually uses it within a heat exchanger. And this heat exchanger is used to heat a fluid, and let's just say that that fluid's going to be water, and that water is converted into steam, and that high pressure steam is then going to be used to turn these blades, and these blades are going to be within what we call a turbine, and that turbine is connected to a generator, which is then used to produce electricity. So this would be considered an inexhaustible energy source because the heat of the earth will always be available to us. So what type of energy source is this? This is a windmill, where the natural energy source is going to be wind. So again, this is an inexhaustible energy source, so the wind will always be available to us. And what type of energy source is this? This is a solar tower. So essentially the energy source that we're using is the sun. So this would be an inexhaustible energy source. What type of energy source is this? So this is a refinery where the energy source is going to be fossil fuels. So this would be a non-renewable energy source. So we can use fossil fuels, but they cannot be replaced within our lifetime. And then what type of energy source is this? This is a nuclear power plant. So a nuclear power plant uses uranium within a nuclear reactor. So this is the nuclear reactor. And it essentially works like a geothermal plant, but the geothermal plant uses the heat within the earth as its heat source, but a nuclear power plant uses a nuclear reactor or uranium to produce the heat source. So what happens is, here's the water here, and the water comes in and, actually right here, here's the water here, and the water actually goes into the reactor where it's heated, and then it forms steam. And this steam comes around here, and it comes in contact with the turbine. So this is the turbine, and again, the turbine has these blades, and that steam, that high pressure steam, turns these blades. And then that mechanical energy that's created goes to a generator, and this generator uses electromagnetic induction in order to create electricity. So this would be an example of a non-renewable energy source. Okay, so that's all I had for the presentation. I did want to show one example of a turbine generator because it's used quite frequently when we talk about energy generation. So if you remember, like in the nuclear power plant where the water was heated within that nuclear reactor and steam was formed. So the steam would actually come in, one second. So the steam would actually come in and it would contact these blades and it would spin these blades. So these blades would start spinning, and that would create mechanical energy. And that mechanical energy would then go to a generator where electricity would be formed through electromagnetic induction. And we won't go through electromagnetic induction, but I just want you to know how the steam in this particular case, and it can be any fluid, it can be water, it can be air, it can be steam, but that high pressure fluid is used to turn these blades. And by turning these blades, you create mechanical energy, and from there you can actually create electricity.